All right, my people, welcome back to the Optimist Fan Club. Thank you so much for tuning in. First, let's give a shout out to our favorite people, our super Patreon supporters, Eric Schoenauer, Andrew Novak, Jake Sedlak, Hunter Wilkes, Rebecca Funk, DJ Cafe Frog, and Gavin Watucky, our newest donor. Thank you guys so much. If you want to be named in front, you just give $10 a month. Go do that. Today, we're going to be building off of what we talked about in the live show, which was my official declaration of the fact that it is time to fire Kevin Stefanski. Maybe not right now at this moment, but this has to be the last season because this operation has run its course. And I've had some more time to just simmer, but there were multiple times. And if you are on the Patreon, you've seen me talk about like, okay, if we lost the Dolphins game, that has to be the moment. And then it kind of shifted. Not that winning the Dolphins game gives you another full season of guaranteed stability. It was like, no, now this shifts to a team like the Jets. If you lose to the Jets, you have to be out because it signals that everything that you've tried to build has officially crumbled. And there were multiple things that happened around the league this week that really point to the fact that Kevin Stefanski and this regime in general, that's Andrew Berry, it's Paul DePodesta, who's already gone, and Kevin Stefanski, why that is not the answer and why there has to be a shakeup. I mean, you hear a lot of people in the media, guys like John Middlecoff, who I've talked about before. His podcast 3 and Out, I think he's the best NFL talk guy out there. I also really like Colin Cowherd. I know a lot of people don't like Colin Cowherd, but I think for what he does, he's extremely professional. He's talented. But guys like Colin Cowherd, they actually give Kevin Stefanski a lot of praise. He says, I like the head coach. I like the GM. They're smart guys. They're well respected. You hear around people talking about, oh, these guys are smart. They're well respected. Then you hear a guy like John Middlecoff, who was actually a scout in the NFL. And he's like, I don't know why they get so much grace. If they were coaching in New York, like they wouldn't have this much respect in the media. People like Dan Orlovsky going on ESPN being like, oh, the New York Giants should look out for Kevin Stefanski while he still has a job after they fire Brian Daboll. It's craziness. And what all of these people aren't understanding by being outsiders looking in, what we understand as Browns fans, some much more irrational and emotional than others, is that it's been too much and too long with issues relating to accountability and proactivity. And when you lack proactivity and when you lack accountability, you breed mediocrity. And that is where we are. We have bred mediocrity. I've talked about all of these things endlessly. But you look at what just happened with Detroit. So they had some issues. They didn't like the state of the offense. Dan Campbell steps in. He takes over offensive play calling, something that like people didn't really look at Dan Campbell as being that kind of guy necessarily. He had Ben Johnson for the majority of his time. Now they move on to this new guy. He takes over. They go out. They score 40 points. And it doesn't mean that the offensive coordinator gets fired. It doesn't mean that they have to wait all this time and mull the decision and him be asked by the media over and over and over. He just went and he did it. And he made a move that he thought was the proactive right decision to make ahead of time before things got worse. And they got an immediate bump from it. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the best decision going forward all the way down the line with Dan Campbell calling plays. But the fact that he did it and they're willing to test things out, it doesn't make them irrational. It doesn't make them an unstable franchise. It means that they're constantly retooling and trying to find a way to be more effective. And if you look at the way this offense operates, it is the same thing since 2020, but with worse players. So how are you expecting better results in general? Even if you had that same level of talent, you've been doing the same thing for so long that eventually it's going to be really easy for other defenses to figure you out. But this goes beyond just scheming and play calling, because we've seen Kevin Stefanski now 2 years in a row give up the play calling after long periods of him being asked by the media. Like before he handed it over to Ken Dorsey, he was being asked, week in and week out. He was being asked the season previous to that if he would give up offensive play calling to Alex Van Pelt. And now this year, it happens again for the second year in a row to Tommy Rees. Why? I don't necessarily know. Should it have happened earlier? I think so. But let's shift away from the offensive play calling. Let's go back to accountability and proactivity. Like, go back to the Jadeveon Clowney problem. The fact that they let that fester. If you don't remember, Jadeveon Clowney at one point was refusing to enter games because he didn't like the matchups that he was being given, because Myles Garrett was always getting the most advantageous matchup, being their best pass rusher. Jadeveon Clowney, through a hissy fit, didn't want to go in the game. And he just kind of lingered. He wasn't cut. Then you look at the OBJ situation. That thing built up for weeks. Honestly, even before that, even the season when he tore his ACL in Cincinnati in 2020, like, there were problems. Baker never played as well when OBJ was on the field. Then you move on to the following season. You have the Minnesota game. His dad puts the tape out. There's all this stuff. And then they were forced to move off of him. There's no proactivity. There's no there's no foresight, rather, of looking at a situation and be like, okay, like, this isn't working. We should trade this player and recoup something back. We should do something to make sure that we're in position to get a good return for what we're dealing with, or we can just send a message that this is not going to be acceptable within this program. We could do those things. But that's not what happens. They let things fester. They let Joe Woods be the coordinator for 2 years too long, or at least 1.5 seasons too long. They just allowed Deshaun Watson to go out there for 7 straight weeks and look the way he did before tearing his Achilles, and they kept telling us, he gives us our best chance. He gives us our best chance. That was not the case. Jameis Winston was a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson. Without a doubt. Even with all the interceptions, Jameis Winston was the better quarterback. You look at Jed Wills. I've talked about this one at length. The way he played, the way he prepared, the way that he performed on the field was unacceptable. And we have allowed mediocrity to fester. Not us. We want better. Kevin Stefanski. And the reason why I put it on Stefanski is because DePodesta is gone now. Barry is more so in charge of personnel. Stefanski makes the decision on who is on the field and who plays. He makes those calls. And when you just continually have questionable things pop up every single season, when your coordinators don't stack up, when you don't fire Bubba Ventrone the day after he allows 2 return touchdowns in 2 straight kick returns, that tells you everything that you need to know. That this coach and this regime, I put this on everyone involved within this current regime, Jimmy Haslam not included, because if anything, he's always been an irrational, sporadic, fly by the seat of his pants kind of guy. You know, that's what most people would describe him as. He's been very patient this time around, but I think it's because of this regime. So that's why I say this regime. This regime has not been proactive enough. They have not solved problems. And you see that in the personnel. You see that in the state of the offensive line. You see it in the way that the plays are called. You see it in the style of offense. You see it in the fact that Dillon Gabriel is out here starting again, and they just lie to people and say he's our best opportunity right now. We want to develop him. We see a lot in him. It's just not true. You cannot piss in our glass and tell us it's lemonade. Like, I'm sorry, and again, this is not going to turn into a Shedeur Sanders thing, but it does not matter. Any backup in the NFL, any backup who was sitting behind Dillon Gabriel after the way that Dillon Gabriel has played through his 5-6 starts should get the nod at this point. That is an absolute fact. That is an absolute fact. It doesn't matter if it's Spencer Rattler was your backup. It doesn't matter if it was Mitch Trubisky. It doesn't matter if it's Jalen Milroe. It doesn't matter if it was Mac Jones before if any of these guys were the backups in Cleveland, any of them, they would get the nod. You would not continue to put guys out there who cannot perform and who can barely see over the line and who can barely complete a pass. That would not happen with any other team. But I think that there is a hard-headedness, and there's part of me that tries to cope and be like, maybe it's just tanking and they know that it's not going to work, and maybe if they put in Shador, it gives them a better chance, and if they fire Ventrone, it gives them a better chance, so they want to keep all these things in place. But it doesn't matter because Stefanski and this current regime should not last this season, and really cannot. If they do, then I will come to terms with like, okay, they were intentionally tanking. But that's a whole issue in and of itself of like doing a disservice to your current roster. People are going to have a problem with that when they show up for training camp next year, being like, oh, you're back, the guys who threw away our season. Why should we trust and fight and believe in you now? So I don't think that that's what's going on. I think that there is a hard-headedness and an unwillingness to adapt and change the same way that you see in franchises across the NFL. What we saw with Dan Campbell. What we even saw with Juan Thornhill getting cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to put a video out about that out tomorrow, so make sure you go check that out. Subscribe, hit the bell for when that drops. But there's an inability to have foresight with this team. And that is why they are where they are. And that is why Stefanski just can't be back. And I think the final point on this, the final reason why he can't be back, and why he might just be mentally checked out, which is another theory that you hear, is that the scars are too deep. The meddling was too aggressive. The overriding of certain decisions was too much. And I don't think Kevin Stefanski wants to be a part of that whatsoever. I don't think that he's necessarily strong enough to overcome that. I don't think a lot of people are. I think that that's why the Browns have been where they've been for so long. But I look at what happened with Deshaun Watson. I look at the fact that Paul DePodesta and the people inside the front office basically fired Alex Van Pelt to bring in Ken Dorsey to try and maximize Deshaun Watson that final year. They were really giving him a run before he tore his Achilles. That was a front office decision. That was not Kevin Stefanski's decision. Why are we going to look at a guy who won't even fire his special teams coordinator after he gives up 2 return touchdowns in 1 game? Why would anyone ever believe that the guy who won't do that fired his offensive coordinator, who he went to the playoffs with in year 1? It's nonsensical. And in 2023, it's nonsensical. So the front office meddled in that. I think that that was honestly just from the outside looking, and that was one of the big things that Stefanski is like, okay, I don't have control here. I'm kind of checked out, and we'll see what happens after this season. So I think that those scars are too deep. There's nothing that you can do with an organizational reload, bringing in new coordinators, getting a high draft pick for a quarterback. I just don't think it will ever work. Those things are always going to persist. And there needs to be a fresh start for everybody involved. I think Kevin Stefanski is a good coach. I've been a big defender of him for a long time. But after last week and continuing on going forward, he needs to be fired. He needs to move on. He needs to do his thing. I'm sure he will find success. But there's an unwillingness to adapt and to change and be proactive. And I firmly believe that that is what has bred the mediocrity that we are consuming for 3 hours every single Sunday. So with that being said, this is a little bit of a rant. Go over, check out Patreon. We're going to be putting out a ton more stuff. We have our mock draft 1.0. We're probably going to do a 2.0 within the next 2 weeks. So make sure to check that out. They are long, they're in depth. And we're going to start putting out some quarterback rankings, receiver rankings, where we kind of like go toe to toe with these players with their game film and all that stuff. So make sure to check that out. We're going to put out our prediction for Baltimore and some other stuff over there. So check it out, support the page. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.